In 1971, the Louvre Museum in Paris, the same building that houses the Mona Lisa, put a car on display. Not a concept car, not a racing legend. A two-door British farm vehicle with rubber floors, vinyl seats, and an interior its own designer said you could hose down like a barn. The Louvre called it an exemplary work of industrial design. Here's the part that doesn't add up. The men who built it weren't trying to make anything special. They were trying to build a better tractor. This is the story of how Land Rover accidentally created one of the most influential vehicles in automotive history, and why almost nobody involved saw it coming. If you're into the real engineering history behind the cars that shaped the industry, subscribe now, because this channel breaks down exactly how these machines came to exist. By the 1960s, Land Rover had a gap it hadn't noticed yet. The original Land Rover, launched in 1948, was built for one purpose: work. Farmers drove it. The military drove it. It crossed deserts, climbed mountains, got stuck in mud, and kept running. That was the entire design brief. Durability, not comfort. There was no pretense of refinement, because refinement wasn't the point. But by the early 1960s, the market outside Britain was shifting. In America, a new category of vehicle was emerging, one that could go off-road but didn't have to look like a tool when it wasn't. The Jeep Wagoneer arrived in 1963. The Ford Bronco followed in 1966. These vehicles could handle rough terrain, but they could also sit in a suburban driveway on a Sunday morning and look presentable doing it. Rover's own American sales operation had already flagged the issue. They shipped a Series 2 Land Rover back to Britain fitted with a smooth, powerful aluminum V8, sourced originally from Buick, with a clear message attached: "This is what the market wants." Land Rover knew how to build something that could survive anything. It had never built something a person actually wanted to live with day to day. No comfort, no refinement, no reason to choose it for a normal road trip if you had another option. That was the gap. One engineer decided to close it. His name was Charles Spencer King. Colleagues called him Spen. He wasn't a stylist and he wasn't a marketing man. He was an engineer who had been at Rover since 1945. His uncles, Maurice and Spencer Wilkes, were the men behind the original Land Rover, so the company's engineering culture was effectively in his family. In 1959, King became chief engineer of new vehicle projects. By 1966, he had a specific idea fixed in his head: build something with better off-road capability than a standard Land Rover, but appreciably nicer to drive on ordinary roads. That was the entire brief. The internal project was named the 100-inch station wagon, a reference to its wheelbase, not exactly a name built for marketing. To solve the ride problem, King and his colleague Gordon Bashford bought a Ford Bronco and took it apart to study how it achieved long travel suspension, the kind that delivers a smooth ride on pavement without destroying the axles off-road. They examined its coil spring setup, then tested their own Rover P6 saloon across rough scrub terrain. That test convinced King that coil springs were the answer. This was a genuinely unusual call for the era. Every Land Rover at the time rode on leaf springs. Simple, tough, and durable, but stiff and agricultural in feel. King wanted a vehicle that felt composed on the road, even though it was engineered to go anywhere. Development took several years, carried out quietly by a small team inside Rover's factory in Solihull. The engine question resolved itself almost by coincidence. Rover already held the rights to that aluminum V8 originally developed by Buick, the same unit fitted to the American Test Mule Series 2. It was light, powerful, and already sitting in the building, so it went straight into the new project. The suspension system became the vehicle's defining engineering achievement. Coil springs front and rear, combined with long travel axles, gave the 100-inch station wagon something no Land Rover had ever had: a genuinely comfortable ride on paved roads, while still allowing the axles to flex dramatically across rough terrain. It also became the first production vehicle in the world with permanent four-wheel drive, not selectable four-wheel drive that the driver switches on and off, but a system engaged at all times. By 1968, pre-production prototypes were ready for real-world testing on public roads. That created a problem. Rover needed to test the vehicles without the press or competitors figuring out what was coming. So they set up a small shell company in London specifically to register the test vehicles under a false identity. The name chosen was Velar, from the Italian word velare, meaning to veil or conceal. 26 test vehicles wore Velar badges and were driven openly on public roads. Journalists and rival manufacturers saw them repeatedly and had no idea what they were looking at. 26 cars hid in plain sight, and the secret held. The Range Rover launched on June 17, 1970, as a two-door wagon. The aluminum V8 sat under a clamshell bonnet. It had permanent four-wheel drive, disc brakes on all four wheels, and the coil spring suspension system King had spent years developing. Then there was the interior, and this is the detail that defines the entire early identity of the car. No wood, no leather, vinyl seats, rubber floors, a dashboard that looked like it belonged in a commercial van, because that was intentional. The vehicle was designed to go from a muddy field to a paved road and back again, without anyone worrying about the upholstery. David Bache, Rover's chief stylist, described the design goal directly. They wanted an interior where you could wear Wellington boots or evening dress and feel equally at home. The press response was immediate and enthusiastic. Motor Magazine, one of Britain's most respected automotive publications, described it as a vehicle equally at home in Park Lane, the Sahara, a cart track, or a plowed field. No other vehicle on the market had ever earned that description. Public demand outran supply almost immediately, and a pattern quickly emerged in who was actually buying the car. These weren't farmers, these weren't construction crews, these were wealthy buyers with plenty of other options, and they wanted more refinement than the vehicle currently offered. Spen King later reflected on this directly, noting that the original Range Rover's interior certainly wasn't a luxury product. In many ways, it was quite basic. But a vehicle that's genuinely capable and genuinely different at the same time tends to escape the control of the people who built it. Wealthy families in the British countryside started buying them in numbers. Landowners who needed to move a horse box down a narrow lane but also wanted to arrive at a decent restaurant without embarrassment. The Range Rover was the only vehicle on the market that could credibly do both. Demand ran so far ahead of supply that a gray resale market appeared almost immediately. Buyers paid premiums over list price to skip the waiting list, and some owners resold their vehicles at a profit within months of taking delivery. The factory in Solihull couldn't keep pace. The car started showing up at country estates and shooting weekends. Social settings where the vehicle you arrived in said something about who you were. Land Rover had stumbled into the aspirational luxury market by accident. 1 year after launch in 1971, the Louvre in Paris did something it had never done before. It displayed a production automobile inside the museum. A Range Rover, wrapped in Union Jack bunting, was placed in the entrance hall alongside the Venus de Milo and the Mona Lisa. The museum's own description called it an exemplary work of industrial design. The man who engineered it had said he spent almost no time thinking about how it looked. Designing purely for function with total clarity of purpose had produced something that read as art almost by accident. But while critics were writing about the design and wealthy buyers were snapping up the waiting list, the vehicle was also proving its underlying engineering claims in the harshest conditions available. In 1971 and 1972, a team of British soldiers drove 2 Range Rovers from Anchorage, Alaska, to Tierra del Fuego at the southern tip of Argentina. The route passed through the Darién Gap, 250 miles of dense jungle and swamp between Colombia and Panama that had been officially classified as impassable by vehicle. The Range Rovers crossed it anyway. The full expedition covered 18,000 miles, and the jungle section alone took 99 days to complete. Then, in 1979, a Range Rover won the very first Paris-Dakar Rally, a grueling 10,000-kilometer route from Paris to Dakar, Senegal. Of the 182 vehicles that started, only 74 finished. A Range Rover finished first. It won the event again in 1981. Back in the showrooms, interior upgrades started almost immediately after launch and never really stopped. Carpet came first, followed by better seat trim, then power steering in 1973. By 1981, the Range Rover had gained a proper 4-door body, a change the market had effectively been demanding since day one, though it took 11 years to arrive. That same year, Land Rover released the first factory-built limited edition Range Rover, produced in collaboration with Vogue magazine, and called the Range Rover in Vogue. It came with alloy wheels and a noticeably more luxurious interior at a higher price, and it sold out immediately. The name proved durable enough that Vogue became a permanent trim level, one that still exists on Range Rovers today. The commercial signal was now unambiguous. The luxury versions were outselling the standard trucks, carrying higher margins and generating longer waiting lists. Land Rover was no longer accidentally producing a farm tool. It was deliberately building a status symbol, and the market was rewarding that decision. By the mid-1980s, the transformation was essentially complete. Leather seats, wood trim, and electric windows arrived, and an automatic transmission was added in 1982. The Range Rover had moved from being a comfortable alternative to a Land Rover to being a genuine alternative to a luxury saloon car, the first 4x4 that could credibly make that claim. American buyers had been watching this evolution from a distance for over a decade. The Range Rover had actually been designed with the U.S. market partly in mind from the start, but shaky company finances and U.S. regulatory hurdles kept it out of official American sale through the entire 1970s. That didn't stop determined buyers. A network of unofficial gray market importers spent years bringing Range Rovers into the United States, modifying them to meet federal safety and emission standards, and selling them at a significant markup to wealthy buyers who wanted one regardless of the premium. By the mid-1980s, the Range Rover was already considered a must-have for a specific type of American buyer. The Martha's Vineyard set, the Connecticut countryside crowd, people who valued the combination of British heritage, genuine off-road capability, and a silhouette that looked nothing like any other expensive vehicle in the parking lot. In 1987, Land Rover finally opened official U.S. sales. The four-door model arrived with fuel injection, a 4-speed automatic gearbox, and pricing that positioned it directly against Europe's top luxury saloons. It was an immediate commercial success. By the time the second-generation Range Rover launched in 1994, the formula was so well established that every major luxury manufacturer in the world was studying it closely. BMW eventually acquired Land Rover specifically because of what the Range Rover represented as a brand and a business case. When BMW's head of product development assessed the Range Rover's interior quality, he reportedly did it blindfolded, running his hands across every surface in the cabin and identifying roughly 70 individual areas for improvement. That level of scrutiny says everything about how seriously the competition had come to take this vehicle. In the decades that followed, the entire luxury SUV segment emerged directly from this template. Porsche built the Cayenne. BMW launched the X5. Mercedes-Benz developed the M-Class. Bentley created the Bentayga. Lamborghini built the Urus. Every one of these vehicles was chasing some version of what Spenking had arrived at almost by accident inside a factory in Solihull. Off-road capability treated as a symbol of status, ride quality delivered as a promise rather than an afterthought, and a design so functionally clear that it ended up displayed as art. Spenking died in 2010 at the age of 85. In his later years, he remained notably modest about what he'd created. The rubber floors, the vinyl seats, the fact that almost no design time went into how the vehicle actually looked. He never claimed to have predicted any of what followed. That's probably the real lesson here. The Range Rover became one of the most influential vehicles in automotive history, not because someone set out to design a status symbol, but because one engineer asked a straightforward question: what if a vehicle was equally good at everything, and answered it honestly? That turned out to be enough to reshape an entire segment of the industry. If you want the full engineering history behind the British vehicles that changed the automotive world, subscribe and hit the bell. New deep dives drop regularly.